The first time a cop showed up at my door because my HOA president said my wife was weaponizing a tomato plant, I honestly had to stop and ask myself whether I lived in a neighborhood or in the world's dumbest hostage situation. It was 6:00 in the morning, cold enough to make the concrete sting through bare feet, and there I was standing in a bathrobe, staring at a police officer with handcuffs on his belt, while Karen stood across the street by her mailbox, wearing that smug little smile people wear when they think they're about to watch your life come apart. And I'll tell you right now, she really believed that was the morning she won. My name's Marcus. I'm 45. I did 20 years in the Army, and I came out it with a Purple Heart, a bad knee, and a deep appreciation for peace and quiet. That's all I wanted when my wife Elena and I moved into Willowbrook Estates in Phoenix. Nothing fancy, just a modest ranch house, a little front garden, a flag out front, a place where I could heal up, slow down, and maybe enjoy the kind of life people talk about like it still exists. Instead, we got Karen. You know the type. Perfect hair, perfect nails, perfect smile that never once reached your eyes. She lived in the biggest house on our cul-de-sac and ran the HOA like it was a private kingdom she inherited from God. Every morning at 7 sharp, you could hear her heels clicking down the street while she hunted for violations. I am not joking when I say that woman carried a ruler. I saw her measure grass. I saw grown adults look through their blinds and wait for her to pass like villagers hiding from a tax collector. The first thing that set her off was my wheelchair ramp. 3 weeks after we moved in, she came marching up to our door with a measuring tape, a phone camera, and the kind of excitement people usually save for winning the lottery. The aluminum on the ramp was still new enough to smell sharp in the heat. We had permits, inspections, medical documentation. All of it didn't matter. She slapped us with violation for unauthorized structural modification. I explained, calmly at first, that I needed the ramp. I even showed her my military paperwork. She glanced at it and said, "Everyone has problems, Mr. Santos. That doesn't mean property values should suffer." I remember just staring at her, because there are moments in life when somebody says something so cold, so absurd, it almost sounds fake, like your brain refuses to believe a real human being just said it out loud. But she did. My injuries in her mind were a threat to resale value. After that, it turned into open season. Trash can too close to the curb. $200. Flag apparently the wrong shade of red. $300. A ceramic garden gnome Elena kept near the herbs. $150 for inappropriate ornamentation. Every violation came in these manila envelopes that smelled like cheap perfume and desperation. Photos, timestamps, certified mail, all of it arranged like she was building a murder case instead of harassing a veteran over a yard decoration. And the worst part was, it wasn't equal, not even close. Other people got away with everything. Broken lights hanging half the year, boats in driveways, cracked fences, junk in side yards. Nothing. But Elena planted tomatoes, and suddenly it was a civic emergency. One of the few neighbors willing to talk to me honestly was Tom, another veteran, and he told me the last few families who lived in our house had all been driven out the same way. A young Hispanic family, an older black man. Each one lasted until Karen made life miserable enough that leaving felt easier than fighting. That was when the pattern started coming to focus. And once you see something like that, you can't unsee it. Karen wasn't enforcing rules. She was picking targets. Anybody who didn't fit the little picture in her head of what that neighborhood was supposed to look like. She leaned on them until they broke. Now me, I wanted to go straight at her. I wanted to drag every rule book into the street, knock on doors, start a war. Elena didn't. Elena stayed calm in a way that almost drove me crazy. She would take each violation notice, smooth it flat, put it in a folder, and say, "We'll handle it properly." At night, she started making these quiet phone calls in the office, taking notes, sorting papers with courthouse seals on them. She'd leave for meetings dressed sharper than usual, carrying a leather portfolio, and come back with more documents and that same steady look on her face, like she could already see the end of the story I was still trapped in. At the time, I thought she was just being thorough. What I didn't know was that my quiet wife was laying tracks for a train Karen never heard coming. The fight really changed over a backyard vegetable garden. Elena had built this little patch of peace back there. Tomatoes, basil, peppers, a few herbs. Nothing wild. Just something living, something good. The smell of fresh basil drifted to the yard in the evenings, and I hadn't seen her smile like that in a while. Then Karen sent over an $800 violation notice claiming the garden broke some desert habitat rule and disrupted ecological harmony. I laughed when I read it, because what else are you supposed to do when evil gets stupid? Elena didn't laugh. She just said, "Interesting," and disappeared for weekend. When she came back, she had a folder so thick it looked like it could stop a bullet. Turns out Karen had twisted a city ordinance beyond recognition. The rule she cited didn't apply to us at all. It was for commercial developments. Residential food gardens were not only legal, they were protected. Elena had the code sections highlighted, citations marked, notes written in the margins. But that wasn't all she'd done. She had also investigated Karen. And let me tell you, Karen's own property was a disaster if you judged it by the same standards she used on everybody else. Plants that violated water use recommendations, decorative features running during drought restrictions, imported landscaping that needed treatment she'd probably report anyone else for using. Elena documented all of it, clean and precise, then walked across the street and handed Karen a folder. I watched from the kitchen window. Karen's face changed in stages. First annoyance, then confusion, then that sick little pause people get when they realize somebody else knows more than they do. Our garden violation quietly vanished that same day. No apology, of course. Just gone. But instead of backing off, Karen doubled down. She tried to push through emergency HOA rule changes, started calling in complaints, sent a city inspector after our electrical work, even tried to drag our electrician into it with fake accusations. The inspector showed up already annoyed, checked everything, and told us the work was spotless. Later that night, our electrician called furious because somebody had tried to pressure him into finding violations. Joe had saved the text. He'd also saved a voicemail from a woman pretending to be a city official. It was Karen, not even disguised well. That was the first time I saw Elena's whole expression sharpen. She listened to that voicemail like a surgeon studying an X-ray. Not angry, not rattled, focused. Then more pieces started coming in. Mrs. Violet from down the street showed us years of citations tied to her Chinese New Year decorations and traditional plants. Tom had records of Karen measuring his Purple Heart Memorial display and calling it aesthetically disruptive. Jake and Sierra had screenshots from Karen's social media posts, the kind of passive-aggressive filth people write when they want to say hateful things without using the words directly. By then, our dining room looked less like a home and more like an evidence room. And then came Karen's masterpiece, a certified demand for $3,900 in fines. The number was so exact it felt rehearsed, like she'd sat there figuring out the highest amount she could hit us with before somebody outside the neighborhood might notice. Pay now or face a lien. Or, and this was her favorite part, avoid it by issuing a public apology to the neighborhood and submitting to monthly compliance inspections. She wanted humiliation. Not money, not order. Humiliation. I sat there with that letter in my hand and felt something hot and ugly settle in my chest. Disability checks, medical bills, all that pressure, all that stress, and this woman wanted to make a show out of crushing us. Then came the HOA meeting where she planned to make it official. She scheduled it during the day. Of course, when most people couldn't come, I went in alone. Elena said she had work and told me not to worry. Karen sat up front with her little allies and her printed apology letter already waiting on the table, like she'd pre-ordered my surrender. She gave me 15 minutes to defend myself. I laid out our documents. City code, photos, comparisons, timelines. She brushed it all aside like lint. Rules are rules, she said. Then Elena walked in. I'd seen my wife dress professionally plenty of times, but this was different. Black blazer, portfolio in hand, heels striking floor in this clean, measured rhythm that changed the whole room. People straightened up without even realizing it. Karen's smile twitched. Elena sat down, listened for a while, then stood and handed Karen a sealed envelope with an official mark on it. Karen opened it, and I swear to you, I watched the blood leave her face. The meeting fell apart after that. She called for delays, whispered to lawyers, stumbled through nonsense, then adjourned and fled like the room was on fire. That night, I finally got the truth. Elena sat across from me at our kitchen table, opened her portfolio, and told me she was a judge, not a clerk, not a researcher, a judge. 15 years on the bench. Housing-related matters, civil rights, appeals work, the whole thing. I just stared at her like I'd been married to a superhero with a library card. She explained why she hadn't told me the full scope. Ethics, boundaries. She could not use her office as a weapon against Karen. If she stepped over that line, everything would collapse. So she had done it the hard way, as a private citizen, documenting every violation, every act of retaliation, every pattern of discrimination. What she'd handed Karen was devastating. Records from previous neighborhoods, complaints, patterns, other victims, evidence that Karen had done versions of this before. And now, with our case, plus the others, the pattern was so clear it practically shouted. Karen had not been running an HOA. She had been practicing discrimination with stationery. After that, the neighborhood changed fast. People who had been scared started talking. Mrs. Violet brought years of records. Tom brought photos, dates, and statements. Jake and Sierra brought screenshots. Even Karen's own husband, looking 10 years older than he should have, showed up one night with a flash drive and an apology. Said he couldn't keep pretending he didn't see what she'd become. Then Karen panicked. And panic makes stupid people reckless. She filed complaints against Elena, called police, made false reports, posted rants online, tried to bribe Tom into signing a statement, saying she had always treated him fairly. He recorded her. She called 911 over Elena watering tomatoes in our own yard. I wish that part were a joke, but it isn't. An officer showed up, looked around, looked at Karen, and you could see in his face that he was trying very hard not to ask whether anybody in that household had slept lately. By then, every move Karen made added another brick to the wall closed around her. The final public collapse happened at a city meeting on HOA abuse and fair housing enforcement. The room was packed. Residents from all over Phoenix showed up. Some were curious. Some were angry. Some had their own Karen stories and wanted blood in the water. One by one, people testified. Mrs. Violet spoke about cultural targeting. Tom spoke about being singled out as a veteran. Jake and Sierra laid out the social media pattern. I told them what it felt like to have a medically necessary ram treated like a moral failure. What it did to a man to be told his injuries were bad for property values. Then Elena stood up, and when she spoke, the whole room went silent. Not because she was loud, because she didn't need to be. She explained exactly what this was. Not personal drama, not neighborhood conflict, not people being too sensitive. Discrimination, selective enforcement, retaliation, the kind of quiet abuse that hides behind bylaws and pretends to be order. She said something that has stayed with me ever since. She said when people use rules to punish who you are instead of what you've done, those aren't rules anymore. That's prejudice in a costume. Karen tried to defend herself after that, but it was over. You could hear her in the room. She wasn't an authority figure anymore. She was just a bully with paperwork, caught in the light. 6 months later, she was gone. She paid restitution, lost her license, lost her position. got barred from serving on housing boards. The fines she tried to use to bury us were refunded. The board was replaced. The whole neighborhood started over. And the sweetest part? The shared garden space Karen once tried to control became a real community garden. Tom grows herbs beside his memorial patch. Mrs. Violet grows vegetables from recipes she learned as a girl. Jake and Sierra planted bright flowers that make the place feel alive. Elena's tomatoes are the best in the whole lot, which feels so perfectly cruel I still smile every time I think about it. Sometimes that's a lesson, I guess. The people who chase power the hardest usually think fear is the same thing as respect. It isn't. Fear only works until somebody finally keeps the receipts. And once the truth is organized, patient, and no longer afraid, power gets real small, real fast. These days, when I hear kids laughing near that garden and see neighbors actually talking to each other instead of hiding behind blinds, I think about how close we came to being driven out like the others. Karen wanted to make us kneel. Instead, she handed us the proof that took her down. And that, to me, is karma at its finest. So let me ask you this. When somebody uses rules, status, or procedure to bully people they think are weaker, do you believe turning the other cheek is the right thing, or do you believe there comes a point where fighting back becomes a duty? Tell me where you stand, and tell me whether you've ever dealt with someone who mistook authority for ownership over other people's lives.